Today, we're talking about one of the most pivotal moments in American history, the Battle of Antietam. It's incredible to think about how a single, unbelievably brutal day didn't just alter the course of the Civil War, it fundamentally changed what America was fighting for.
So, picture this. It's September 17, 1862. The sun comes up over Sharpsburg, Maryland, but instead of a peaceful dawn, it's the beginning of a 12-hour tempest, a storm of lead and iron that would leave a permanent scar on the nation's memory. Let's dig into how it all started.
So, you have to ask, how in the world did these two massive armies end up here? Well, this was no accident. This was a calculated, incredibly high-stakes gamble, especially for the Confederacy. We're about to see just how much pressure was on both sides.
Okay, so the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, he's just come off this huge victory. He's got all this momentum. He even wrote to the Confederate President, Jefferson Davis, saying, "We cannot afford to be idle." So he makes this audacious move. He's going to take the war north, right into Union territory.
Now, Lee's plan wasn't just about winning one fight. It was a multi-layered strategy. He's thinking, hey, maybe we can scare Northern voters in their elections. His army desperately needed food and supplies, and getting the fighting out of Virginia for a while, that would be a huge relief. He even hoped he could convince Maryland to join the Confederacy. But the big prize, the ultimate goal, was to win a massive victory on Northern soil that could, just maybe, win the entire war.
And you can just feel the pressure on both of these leaders. You've got Lee, who is literally betting everything he has on this one invasion. Meanwhile, back in Washington, President Lincoln is sitting on this secret, world-changing document. But he can't just release it. Not after a whole string of Union defeats. It would look desperate. He absolutely needed a victory. So the stage was set for this tragic, epic collision.
It's one thing to talk about the grand strategy of generals, but what was it actually like for the men on the ground? For the people who had to live through this? Let's hear from them directly, because their words paint a picture that no map ever could.
This quote from a Confederate private just gets me every time. Can you imagine marching into enemy territory with the entire cause resting on your shoulders, and you are literally starving, eating unripe apples and corn from the fields, with no shoes? It just gives you a sense of the absolute desperation that was fueling Lee's army.
And then you flip the coin. For the Union soldiers, it was just pure terror. This entry from Robert Kellogg's diary, wow, it puts you right there with him, that feeling of complete helplessness while artillery shells are exploding all around you. There's no glory in that. It's just this raw, human fear. It really shows you that suffering didn't wear a uniform.
And then, in the middle of all that chaos and hate, you get these moments that are just almost unbelievable. This story of a Confederate soldier blinded by a bullet carrying a wounded Union soldier off the battlefield, it just stops you in your tracks. It's proof that even in the absolute darkest of times, that basic human instinct to help someone in pain could still break through.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the battle itself. The Union general, McClellan, he had this plan on paper for a big, coordinated attack. But what really happened was a series of chaotic, brutal, and totally disconnected fights that turned these quiet Maryland farms into an absolute slaughterhouse.
This Army correspondent, Charles Carlton Coffin, he just captured the sound of it perfectly. It didn't start all at once. It started small, like rain on a roof. And then it grew and grew into this constant, deafening roar, an ocean wave of violence that crashed over the landscape from dawn until dusk, 12 straight hours.
And the battle wasn't really spread out evenly. The fighting became incredibly intense at a few key spots, places that had normal, everyday names. A cornfield, a small patch of woods, a sunken country road were about to get new names, names that would be burned into American history forever.
Just take a second and really look at these numbers. The cornfield, in just 4 hours, over 8,000 men were killed or wounded. That farm road, which would become known as Bloody Lane, another 5,400 casualties. These aren't just statistics, right? Each one of those numbers is a person, a life just obliterated in an impossibly short amount of time. The scale of it's just hard to wrap your head around.
And if those numbers feel abstract, this quote from Union General Joseph Hooker makes them terrifyingly real. He's talking about that cornfield, where the storm of bullets and cannonballs was so thick that it literally cut down the corn stalks just as cleanly as a knife. And the men lay dead in the exact same rows where they had been standing to fight. That image is just utterly haunting.
So the sun finally sets on September 17th. The guns fall silent. Both armies are completely battered, standing pretty much where they started that morning.
But the price of that stalemate, it was absolutely breathtaking. And the country was about to wake up to the horrific new reality of this war.
23,000. That's the number. 23,000 men killed, wounded, missing, or captured in one day. To this day, it is still the bloodiest single day in all of American history. I mean, think about it. That's more American casualties than on D-Day during World War II. In 12 hours.
This quote from a regular soldier, it just cuts right to the heart of it all. Behind all the big numbers and the strategy, it comes down to this: the primal, human need to survive when you are facing absolute terror. When you read that, you realize it's a miracle that anyone stood and fought at all.
And you know, we can't forget that the horror didn't stop when the shooting did, especially for the people who lived in Sharpsburg. Their homes were turned into makeshift hospitals, their farms became graveyards, their wells were poisoned. When the armies finally marched away, they left behind total ruin and disease. The civilians were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives.
But here's the thing. Out of all this unbelievable carnage came an equally unbelievable political shift. Antietam might have been a tie on the battlefield, but it became the strategic victory that President Lincoln had been desperately waiting for. It gave him the opening to change everything.
So, Lee's army was just too beaten up to keep going. The day after the battle, they packed up and began the long retreat back to Virginia. Now, it wasn't the knockout blow Lincoln wanted, but it was enough. The Confederate invasion had been stopped cold, and that was the political win Lincoln knew he could use.
And look how fast this happened. The battle is on the 17th. Lee pulls back, and on the 22nd, just 5 days later, Lincoln makes his move. He issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. The link between the battle and this proclamation is direct. It's undeniable. The bloodshed at Antietam was the trigger.
And this is the whole point. This document completely reframed the war. It was no longer just about holding the country together. It was now officially a war to end slavery. It turned the Union Army into an army of liberation. It changed the entire moral landscape of the war, not just in America, but for the whole world. So in the end, Antietam is this incredible paradox. A day of unimaginable horror that became the terrible, bloody price for a profound change in America's purpose. A step towards what Lincoln would later call a new birth of freedom. And it really forces us to ask a tough question. What is the true price we have to pay to turn our highest ideals into reality?